I'd just like to talk about the issue of gay marriage in Australia. This is something that's been pushed mostly on media as some sort of number one priority above all things. And myself, I'm not really concerned about legal arrangements between gays or anyone else for that matter, so long as they're voluntary arrangements. But let's look at what's pushing this. Because there seems to be little, if any, goodwill amongst the society as a whole. So, with gay marriage, you could say the first priority is to do with inheritance. Well, if you want to say heterosexual couples or heterosexual weddings or marriages, more correctly, it is assumed that if one of those involved in the marriage dies, that the property will be automatically passed on to the other participant or partner. And you've also got the issue of children. And as we have de facto arrangements, be aware that even if you're in a de facto arrangement, let's say one of the people in the de facto arrangement has had a child previously in another relationship, that child has priority in gaining any property assets which may be disposed of during the will or the right of inheritance. It's the biological aspect which makes a marriage legally sanctified, or should do. And with gays, homosexuals, there's a big difference, because two guys can get married and they might decide to adopt a child because biologically they cannot reproduce. And in order to adopt a child, they would have to have some sort of approval by government, or most likely what would be equivalent to a license. Whereas in heterosexual marriages, it's not necessary, although you'd still need approval to adopt if, say, the female or either partner within a heterosexual marriage cannot reproduce. But other arrangements could be made from that. Might choose to adopt, might choose to have someone else's, have another partner involved. And so we're seen a legal quagmire, which the issue of gay marriage complicates. I remember, a few years ago, there was a push on in Australia for a specific act regarding gay marriage. And one thing I noted, that there was no provision for a gay divorce, which would require another act, but it was not necessary or fashionable or whatever. And so the whole thing was basically unworkable. So now we're having what's called marriage equality, that is to make homosexual marriages on the same level as heterosexual marriages. But the main concern is that a heterosexual marriage will often result in children to the specific parents involved in the marriage, whereas a homosexual marriage would rely on adoption for there to be any children within that relationship. And so if you raise the bar for homosexual marriage, there would have to be a compromise with heterosexual marriage, and that would involve lowering the bar. So my main concern is there's in a homosexual marriage, let's say you have a man who would be legally recognised as a spouse by the government to another man who would also be legally recognised by the government. Then you have the issue of children, again involving the government, involving the state. And to put it on the same level as heterosexual marriage, you would have to have the man, then the state, the woman, then the state, the children, then the state. And you also got the bit about the inheritance. Because even though in a heterosexual marriage, naturally you would assume that all property from the death of one of the spouses would be passed on to the remaining spouse and then passed on to the children, who would be, I suppose you're saying, entitled because they are biological inheritance. Whereas in homosexual relationships or marriages, that wouldn't really actually be an issue. But even a heterosexual marriage and the inheritance right is subject to legal challenge. Someone can just come out of nowhere for whatever reason say, I want money or I want more money. And I do agree that there's a homosexual couple who have arranged some sort of legal contract that they can allow money to be passed on to the other or the estate in the event of death. And as it stands now, a homosexual spouse, for want of a better word, may inherit the property from the other spouse, but a relative you haven't seen for 40 years, who last time you saw him he probably called you a faggot, can come in and claim that money. Say, well, my biological connection to that person, so let's say he's a brother, is stronger, and therefore legally sounder than some guy whose relationship is not legally recognised. This is a big issue, because if you look at the people pushing gay marriage, you've either got politicians or celebrities. And I would not like to rely on the goodwill of politicians or celebrities. But one thing that does concern me is the interference of the state in what you'd call natural relationships, which heterosexual relationships are, which proceed to marriage. And homosexual relationships, even though the state, there would have to be a difference. They cannot be equal. Two men does not equal a man and a woman. Two women do not equal a man and a woman. So it's as though the state is trying to dictate biological laws. The only winner I can see out of all of this our lawyers and the judiciary, because the courts will be tied up in so much paperwork as a result of this. And really, I think in Australia we have better things to make our number one priority. So I'll end this part here. But I see something bigger being involved with this. It's something I'm going to have to do another clip. But from what I can see, gay marriage, the issue of it, is just a distraction from other things, where all that really has to be done is to change inheritance laws. Just a couple of amendments which do not involve the state being involved in the distribution of assets of the estate of the deceased person. Remember, Karl Marx wanted to abolish all rights of inheritance, and I believe this is what this whole issue of gay marriage is really about.